Hello, our topic for today is High Renaissance period in Italy. High Renaissance it started in 90s of the 15th century and lasted up to the first third of the 16th century. The term high is here because it's the period when all the artistic aims and goals of the Renaissance reached their greatest application. High Renaissance art is characterized by references to classical art and delicate application of developments from the early Renaissance. So in our lecture, we'll talk about the main features of the High Renaissance art, the main topics that were chosen, that were favorable among artists, the main principles of High Renaissance architecture, some innovations, and main ideas. Renaissance architecture is characterized by symmetry and proportion and is directly influenced by the study of antiquity. The architects representative of the High Renaissance are Donato Bramante and Andrea Palladio. So Andrea Palladio and Donato Bramante are like the leading architects, and here in the slide we can see Tempietto, the masterpiece of High Renaissance period. The Tempietto is almost a piece of sculpture, for it has little architectonic use. The building absorbed much of Brunelleschi style and perfectly proportioned. It is composed with the slender of Tuscan order, a Doric entablature molded after the ancient theater of Marcellus, and there is also a dome. The key figure of Roman architecture during the High Renaissance was Donato Bramante. He was born in 1444 and died in 1514. The Tempietto, a temple that was believed to be the exact spot where Saint Peter was martyred. The temple is circular, similar to early Christian martyrdoms, and much of the design is inspired by the remains of the ancient temple Vesta. The Tempietto is considered by many scholars to be the first example of High Renaissance architecture. With its perfect proportions, harmony of its parts, and direct references to ancient architecture, the Tempietto embodies the Renaissance. It has a circular plan and surrounded by columns. Bramante added a dome and chose the Doric order entablature and Toscana order for the decoration. The Cathedral of St. Peter is in Rome by Bramante as well as by Michelangelo, Carlo Maderno, and Gian Lorenzo Bernini. It is a real masterpiece of High Renaissance architecture. The Pantheon in Rome and Cathedral of Florence served some examples for the creation of St. Peter's Cathedral. The dome of the cathedral rises to the height of 136.5 meters from the floor to the basilica to the top of crowning cross. So it's the highest dome in the world. The cathedral itself, its project, it embodied the idea of an ideal, centrally connected building with a symmetrical composition. The plan of the cathedral is the combination of square with a Greek equal cross. One of the prototypes of this early plan by Donato Bramante is considered being Tempietto, that was created by the same architect as we remember in 1502. That was the example of absolute symmetry and centric type plan. And after the death of architect, the building of this cathedral from 1514 up to 1520 was headed by Raphael Santi. And here he returned to the traditional shape of basilica as the Latin cross type of plan. So that's what we can see here in this slide. When in 1546 the head of the works, was Michelangelo Buonarroti, he returned to the idea of the centric type cross-dome structure. So he increased the cupola space, made it more centric type. During Michelangelo, dome of the dome was erected. Only after his death in 1564 the cupola was finished. By the way, the architect who worked at it was Giacomo della Porta. He created the cupola in the half-sphere shape as Michelangelo wanted, in parabola shape. But that was not the ending of the construction. First half of the 17th century, from 1607 to 1617, the architect Carlo Maderna elongated the eastern part of the plan, so he returned this way to the shape of a Latin cross, as he added facade. The cupolas nowadays also does not dominate the general structure, but it can be clearly seen from some particular sides. Antonio da Sangallo was an architect who completed the evolution of Palazzo on Roman soil. In Palazzo Farnese, for example, he leaves the rust in the corners and in the design of the main entrance, decorates the plastered walls with horizontal bells, changes the framing of the windows on each floor, that provides the building solemnity and elegance. So here is Palazzo Farnese image that is located in Rome. It was constructed from 1570 and finished in 1546, completed by Michelangelo Buonarroti later on, in the middle of the 16th century. Somehow we can compare this wonderful architecture to the examples of early Renaissance. It also very laconic, it has a clear division of the floors. Especially that structure, horizontally oriented, is underlined with cornices. Classical architectural elements are used here. Semicircular arch becomes very important as well, and the rust of external walls is used here also. So what else special about Palazzo Farnese? It was built for Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, later elected Pope Paul III. From the point of view of architecture, we can see the heavily rusticated entrance, and each story has different window frames. So also we see a heavy cornice that crowns this architecture piece. By the middle of the 16th century in Italy, there are a number of academies, in particular the Vitruvian Academy, circa 1530, whose leaders sought to theoretically substantiate the laws of architecture of ancient Rome, studied the treatise of Vitruvius. At this time, features of academism and canonization of Roman ancient architecture foundations were formed. There were also created some theoretical treatises, some very important books for educational purposes. The Rules of Five Architectural Orders, 1562 by Giacomo Vignola, and 4 books on architecture created in 1570 by Andrea Palladio. And here we can see Andreas Palladio Villa La Rotunda in Venice in Italy, that was created in 1570. So what does it remind us? From the point of view of its plan, of course, it is again returned to the antiquity tradition, to ancient Roman pantheon firstly. So we see here that the main facade, the entrance, is decorated with this portico of Ionic order, with the triangle frontone, and there is also a quite big cupolas with some special decoration of glass in the central part of it that really reminds us oculus. Figurative images became an inseparable part of this architecture piece, and that is about synthesis of arts, architecture and sculpture. At the heart of Renaissance ideology was humanism. So it is a philosophy where it is believed that humans are rational and moral. People during Renaissance period, they turned to study classical art and literature from ancient Greek and Roman periods. They believed in a well-rounded education, including the arts, science, history, and philosophy. Religion was still important, but art and literature can also focus on secular, so it means non-religious themes. The father of humanism is called Petrarch. It is important to read what our forerunners have written and to write what later generations may wish to read, and to hand them down to our grandchildren as objects of veneration. Here is a scheme that shows us the main differences between medieval art. So I remind you that medievalism in general, it covers two main periods, the Romanesque and Gothic, and Renaissance art. So what's here different, what is equal? Religious in theme, that is about medieval art. In Renaissance art, we'll see that sometimes it is religious, but often painted religious items were painted in classical time, similar to ancient or Greek or Roman art. And also we can add to the scheme that mythological subjects, portrait genre, so the attention to the human being itself, to the personality, they are very popular here and extremely important, according to the principle of humanism. Then, in medieval art, there was used high stylization, so the so-called flat or two-dimensional type of depictions. And Renaissance art was tending, it was trying its all the best to depict three-dimensional space with the use of perspective, linear and air perspective. This art of Renaissance, it creates illusion of three-dimensional space and makes distant objects appear smaller. For example, what else about perspective? The front ground is usually more contrast, it is usually more detailed than the background, for example. Then, people fully clothed were in medieval art, and there was some lack of detailization. And a controversial situation happened during Renaissance. So here we can see realistic images, detailed images, sometimes even nudes and portraits. By the way, nude genre, it is like interpretation, like return to antiquity. One of the greatest representatives of High Renaissance period is Leonardo da Vinci. He was born in 1452 and died in 1519. So the areas of his interest, they included invention, painting, sculpturing, architecture, science, music, mathematics, engineering, literature, anatomy, geology, astronomy, botany, writing, history, and cartography. So when we say a true man of Renaissance, we mean that this person was eager to make his knowledge in different spheres deeper, as deep as it was possible, and that this person, he does not enclose himself only in one narrow direction, but he was interested in many items, exploring this world. From the previous lecture, we remember that Leonardo da Vinci teacher was Andrea del Verrocchio. And we have seen, for example, in the painting of Verrocchio, Baptism of Jesus Christ, that angels were painted by Leonardo. And here is his earliest complete work, that is called Annunciation. This artwork was created from 1475 to 1480. So this artwork, Annunciation, is the first work of the 20-year-old master. The Annunciation is not yet that one would call Leonardesque. The composition follows an old model with an angel on the left and the Virgin on the right, and the lectern in between. The whole depicted in an architectural setting that opens out onto a landscape. The kneeling angel is magnificently youthful, with his high forehead, stylized wings, rich clothing, and lily. Lily, I remind you, is the symbol of purity of the Virgin. The Virgin Mary, surprised while reading, raised her hand in a gesture of astonishment and displays a fine-featured face with view of being disturbed. Her pose, with knees evenly spread and covered with broad and supple drapery, gives her a strong monumental character. Another artwork that we are going to consider is located in the Church of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. So actually this is a typical basilica structure with a dome, but at the moment let's concentrate on the interior. So this is the fresco Last Supper, and that was painted by Leonardo in 1498. You can see the scale here, and so Leonardo actually he preferred to make different experiments with the technologies of painting. And so here, for example, we can see mixed technique, that is oil and tempera on plaster. The Last Supper is Leonardo's visual interpretation of an event chronicled in all four of the Gospels. So in all, I remind you, Gospels are books in the Christian New Testament. The evening before Christ was betrayed by one of his disciples, he gathered them together to eat, tell them he knew that was coming, and was there, and washed their feet. As they ate and drank together, Christ gave the disciples explicit instructions on how to eat and drink, and in the future, in remembrance of him. It was the first Eucharist. Leonardo is well known for all his love to symmetry, and in his Last Supper the layout is largely horizontal. The large table is seen in the foreground of the image, that all of the figures behind it. The painting is largely symmetrical, with the same number of figures on either sides or on either sides of Jesus. The above diagram shows how the perspective, the Last Supper, was worked out with a series of marks at key points, highlighted the architectural aspects of the composition and positioning of the figures. So here is the scheme. I show it again. An interesting feature of this composition is that we can see one central vanishing point on the horizontal line, and Leonardo he emphasized our attention on this point, that is where Jesus Christ's head is painted. So we can see that all the architectural lines, they are strongly direct into this central point. So that is also one of the features of Renaissance art in general, to use perspective for this deal. And also it's about accentuating the most important center of the composition. And in this case we can see that compositional center, like obvious compositional center like geometrical one, and the ideological center of the composition are the same. So this painting, this fresco, it is created as an illustration to the words from the Gospel. So while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood, and blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. So this moment, the moment of the Last Supper, is the prototype of Eucharism, like the first example that the Lord gave to people, to his pupils himself. Here, by the way, we can see some elements of the composition, and actually between Jesus Christ's figure and the figure of his younger and favorite pupil, John the theologian. So we can see, like, there is also the view of, I can say symbolically, we can notice here, like the view, like the shape that reminds us the bowl of Eucharism also. So we can easily see here from this fragment where the figure of Judah is depicted. So here he is, while all others are involved in the conversation. He is like this figure is outstanding, and so we see that he is depicted here totally in profile, and like his figure is in half darkness here, and he's holding the bag with coins. That was the price for his betrayal, and we can notice also how he is like tending to take bread from the plate, and that was what Jesus said, that the one who will take bread at the same moment as I do it, so that person, and so that's what Jesus noticed, what he said about this. Also, we can see that Leonardo, he used here some elements of landscape, as well as other masters of the previous centuries of the early Renaissance, for example. And so this is like the doors, it's like the windows to the other perspective, like the airy perspective. Here, like the opportunity to see this wonderful landscape with its air perspective changes, like when the layers of air, they give this effect when something that is closer to us, it is more contrast, it's darker, it's more like it's warmer from the point of view of color, and when we see something in some distance from us, then we can notice it's getting lighter, it's getting cooler, colder from the point of view of color. This artwork is called Madonna Lita. So this work shows the Madonna suckling the Christ child. Note the lack of halos in the painting. We see the child and mother in the dramatic moment of weaning. Weaning is when mother needs to, so there is time to stop feeding her child with her breast milk. And on woman's, on her red shirt, there are special cuts through which it is convenient, without removing the dress, to breastfeed the baby. Both cuts were carefully sewn, so that is, it was decided to wean the baby from the breast. But the right cut was hastily ripped up. The top stitches and a piece of thread are clearly visible. Mother, at the insistence of the child, changed her mind and set aside this difficult moment. From the point of view of aesthetics, so we can notice that actually this artwork, this canvas is not big, so we see it's 42 on 33 centimeters, and at the same time it is very detailed. So Leonardo, he painted all the face features of his heroes with such kind of attention, with such kind of tenderness. And again, he uses the same principle of composition when he puts his heroes on some dark background to emphasize all the attention of viewer on them. And also he gives these windows to show that there is something distantly, that there is some air there outside, so not just the dark background. Actually, this is also one of the main principles of the Renaissance art, because we see that all the attention is given to human's figure here. But in this case, yeah, we're dealing with the religious subject, of course, so actually the figures of saints. This artwork that is called Salvator Mundi, that is translated like the Savior of the World. This is one of the artworks by Leonardo that was identified as his work comparatively not long ago. So there were a lot of hesitations to claim that in the scientific circles. There were some questions about that. But anyway, today we can say that that's a real true Leonardo's artwork, created circa 1500 with oil on walnut. So this artwork is based on the canonical iconography of Jesus Christ Pantocrator, when we see that Jesus is turned totally frontally to us. So we have this eye contact with him. With his gesture of blessing and bishop's blessing, because Jesus Christ is like the main priest among others in the church, like among all other priests. And he's holding this transparent orb that actually in art, this sphere is always a symbol of the universe. That is an ideal shape because it does not have the ending, doesn't have the beginning. And so it's totally harmonious. Here we can see that he's holding the sign of the universe. It means that, yeah, he is ruler of everything, Alpha and Omega. So it means that he is the end, he is the beginning and the end of everything. Leonardo used a highly sfumato technique in his paintings, so let's find out what does it mean. Sfumato is all about not having distinct transitions from one color or tone to another. Harsh lines and borders, we can find that colors and tones are subtly and effortlessly blended together to create a sort of hazy and smoky effect. So the result of blending different tones together is that the lighter areas of paintings are toned down a bit and the darker areas are brightened up a bit. So using this technique enables painters to create a more accurate and realistic depiction of color and light in their paintings. It also gives paintings more of the atmosphere and can give facial features more of the illusionistic feeling, while at the same time removing attention from what would otherwise be the painting's focal point. So actually, sfumato technique, in other words, that is the emphasis on the air perspective effect. When there are no high contrast between the different surfaces, so we can see that they are all in one atmosphere, lightened situation. So in other words, this is an effect of smooth outlines and soft touchings of the surfaces with each other. Here the composition is called The Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, the Mother of the Virgin, I remind you. So here we can see that Leonardo turns to his typical composition that in general has such kind of triangle shape. So we can unite all the figures in a triangle here. The next artwork is The Virgin in the Rocks, or Madonna of the Rocks, painted between 1483 and 1486 with oil on panel. Madonna with the Child and John the Baptist and the Angel, so they are all located in a wonderful and mysterious landscape here among the rocks. And these rocks, they create such kind of enframing for the main heroes and help to accentuate the attention on them. It's also obvious that Leonardo used such kind of same principle in the depiction of all his heroes. So they all remind each other. And again, here we can see the usage of this perspective air perspective firstly, and of sfumato technique, because some parts they seem to us like they are drawn in some thickness of air. Before creating his wonderful paintings, Leonardo worked a lot on drawings, and so there are a lot of different sketches left by the artist. So he wanted to capture the reality of people and their emotions, and so here, for example, we can see the drawing, the sketch that he made before the oil paint in the artwork Leda and the Swan. And now here is probably one of the most popular artwork by Leonardo is Mona Lisa, painted circa 1503 up to 1506. And perhaps it was continued up to 1517. So people usually say that there is some mystery about this picture, and why? Because this young woman, she is depicted with such kind of half smile, and her glance, it's like following us whenever we are going, wherever we are standing. So anyway, she's like looking at us with this with a smile. We have some mystery about this lady. So we also can notice that she is shown here in three-quarter position on the background of a landscape, and her figure is bigger than other parts of the composition, and she is like above the horizontal line. These principles are also they also reflect the main idea of High Renaissance period and Renaissance in general, the idea of humanism, when person is like considered like the highest point of the development of the universe and like the best creation of God. All the attention is on her. And we should also notice that Mona Lisa, her figure is also like subordinates to the shape of triangle here. The way I also would like to notice that nowadays we can see like there is some a little bit strange coloring of the background, for example, so we can compare to the previous artworks where there are landscapes, and we can notice that the skies and in general also all these colors, originally they were really brighter, they were colder in from the point of view of color character, but later on with the changes in the layers of varnish, so there is some special thing about the varnish always when in time unfortunately it gets darker and gives some yellowish coloring to the surface of the painting. And art historians and restaurators, they always argue about this, either so they ask they ask themselves and each other, either they need to restore it, to remove this varnish layer, to return to the first, like to the original view of this painting, and so they finally. And nowadays, again, I can say we do not know what is going to happen next, but at the moment they decided that they shouldn't do that, because we all the world used to this version of Mona Lisa, and probably people won't be ready to see her in some other color palette without this yellowish tonality. So again, sfumato technique we can see from here with even crocular, such called. So these are cracks on the surface of oil paint. Originally, before COVID, it was extremely hard to get to see this artwork in closely, because we can see that it's extremely popular, and so probably it's even better for us to look at it this way. She is located in Louvre. Portrait of Ginevra de Benci. It's the portrait of a young girl with a pale face. So she has white cheekbones and a narrow slit of eyes. Stands out against the evening twirling landscape with a dark juniper bush on the middle plan and a pond with the highlights on the water on the back. So this twilight, this sleeping pond, this wide dark mass of juniper with a fine pattern of needles at the edges are in absolute harmony with the spiritual and physical appearance of this girl. We know that there was one of principles of depicting in Renaissance that and later on actually too. So when the landscape is not accidental, when plants, they can symbolically depict the character of the model, her inner statement. So probably again we can only just think of it like a theory that this lady had such kind of character that somehow can be reflected through this juniper bush. Leonardo was very famous for his searching and his studying of anatomy. So he studied it very carefully and very in details, and that really helped him to create such kind of realistic images that are very close to true life proportions. Another very famous work by Leonardo is the so-called Vitruvian Man, created circa 1490. It is a drawing with pen and ink on paper. So the image demonstrates the blend of mathematics and art during the Renaissance and demonstrates Leonardo's deep understanding of proportions. In addition, this picture represents a cornerstone of Leonardo's attempts to relate man to nature. Leonardo was also famous as the inventor, so this way he also was, he reflected the principle of the true Renaissance man who was interested not only in one sphere of some knowledge, but also in many others, so like mathematics, like literature, poetry, inventions, painting, so everything. And the true man of Renaissance, he should be involved in all the process, in examining, in learning the world around him and turning it into some new inventions. So he preoccupied with human flight, he studied the wings of birds and bats. He designed many flying machines, including gliders, parachutes, helicopters, and wings. None were successfully built in his lifetime. We can say that he anticipated his time, and his inventions were not totally or clearly understood by his contemporaries. Another genius of the High Renaissance period was Michelangelo Buonarroti. He was an Italian sculptor, painter, architect, and poet of High Renaissance period. He sculptured two of his best-known works, the Pietà and David, before the age of 30. Also, he created two of the most influential frescoes in the history of Western art, the scenes from Genesis on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome and the Last Judgment on its altar wall. Michelangelo sculptured the Pietà from a single block of Carrara marble, which he claimed was the most perfect block of marble he had ever worked with. He also claimed that he would see the sculpture within the marble itself, and that it was his job to merely remove the excess in order to free the image inside. Michelangelo named his sculpture Pietà, that is translated as crying. It depicts the dead body of Jesus after his crucifixion, draped across the Virgin Mary's lap as she looks down upon his body in grief. Michelangelo was deeply religious, and the Pietà is an expressive piece that was clearly inspired by his deep and abiding faith. Sculpturing the Pietà took less than 2 years, and after its completion, the Pietà was displayed in the chapel of Santa Petronilla, a Roman mausoleum, which was chosen as the funerary chapel of Cardinal Legrand. So we can notice that the Virgin Mary here is depicted as quite a young woman, and all the tenderness of her facial features, they really show her deep feelings about what happened, her sorrow. And this statue in the Renaissance period was called like giant because it was really comparatively big, and we'll see it from the general point of view. So David was created by Michelangelo in 1504. It depicts David, the hero from the Bible, the young king, or in other words, in this case, like the future king, before killed Goliath. Many previous sculptures of David depict very relaxed David with his foot on dead Goliath's head, and Michelangelo's David looks really worried. So here is he. So we notice that he is extremely concentrated because he is going to fight just in some moments. There is the basement in antiquity art again, and how do we see that? Because of firstly, because of the attention to all the proportions of the figure, to all the right composition of it. The man is standing just frontally here. His body is turned to the view frontally, and his head turned to the side. So, and he is standing in the chiasmus, or in other words, contraposed position, when all the weight of the body is put on one leg and another leg is like relaxed, and we can see that it is bent at his knee. Michelangelo was also so he decided to change a little bit proportions of the figure and of the head of David, because originally this statue is standing on quite a high pedestal, like so the point of view on the figure really changed, and from this point of view he created the head of David a little bit bigger than it should be, because from the lower point of view it seems to us that it's in its right proportions instead. Michelangelo was famous not only as a genius sculptor, but even an architect and a painter. So he created a fresco cycle that were paintings on the wet plaster. So this fresco in the Sistine Chapel ceiling, they were created by this master from 1508 to 1512. He was asked to paint the 12 apostles and a few decorations on the ceiling of the chapel. And after 1 year of painting, he revealed a colossal fresco with over 300 figures. So here are these compositions, fresco on the ceiling. And Michelangelo, he had some very special features of his art. So we see that the figures are all depicted with a very material point of view. So we can even feel all these muscles, we can see all the movements of all the heroes. So here is the scheme about the topics that are displayed in this ceiling. One of the most famous compositions is the creation of Adam. So we can see that is the moment when God just inspires Adam. He gives him his spirit, and so we see this contrast between this motion, this energy of God, and between and this weak gesture of Adam. One of the central compositions in the cycle of frescoes is the Last Judgment fresco. It depicts Christ as the central figure judging those who will go to heaven or to hell. This composition took several years to be created. Michelangelo, he showed all his heroes with the exaggerated proportions of their bodies, with this extreme materialism, and with all this musculature and movement also. It's even known that he depicted such kind of great amount of figures, like naked figures of different Bible heroes, that priests, they told the artist to cover this nakedness and to depict some extra draperies. Here is this fresco, so that you can see the scale of it, and it's really it's really hard to imagine, to understand that one master created this. The color palette of Michelangelo's frescoes, it's very bright, as we can see it. We can notice that it's basing on such kind of colors as blue, as in body tone. It's looks like different tones of beige color, but actually we should know that we should understand that Michelangelo was a genius monumental painter, and he really knew a lot about the changes of color from the great distance, when this distance gives us this visual effect of mixing colors, and so they change from this distance because they are all connected with each other, and they impact on each other, they influence on each other. So that's why some of his contemporaries remembered that, so they wrote down, they left these inscriptions, that's how do we know about it nowadays. So they said that when Michelangelo was mixing colors on the floor of the chapel, it seemed to those people, to those contemporaries of the artist, that there was some very dirty color that looked like some gray, some gray color. But when he climbed up and when he put that color on the wall surface, it suddenly seemed that it was on its right place, so it was not that dirty, dusty color anymore. So it became to show its true characteristics. And why? Because of this effect, of the optical effect of mixing colors, because he put that gray, dusty color in the environment of other colors, and so they influenced on it. Even women's figures, like here in the Libyan Sibyl, they are depicting musculature of the person, and so we can say that they more actually remind us the males figures, probably because Michelangelo had opportunity to draw, to paint males figures and not females. But anyway, so we can notice that he perfectly worked out all these perspective changes. For example, it's always very difficult to depict the figure in some difficult movements, like here, for example. Here is the fragment of composition, separation of the earth from the waters, like the topic of creation of the world by the Lord Father, creation of the sun, moon, and planets. So actually I'm not too right when I say by the Lord Father, so it's about the Trinity, so it's about so the God is always he is from the beginning of the world. It's like without the beginning, so because God is endless, he has not beginning and not end, and so we can say that Trinity is like his general character, like feature, and so that's why we should say just that created by God in general. They are also very dynamic. And let's consider another composition by Michelangelo, Conversion of the Apostle Paul, from Chapel Paulina in Vatican. This image was created circa 1542 up to 1545. The composition is still very dynamic. It is divided into like two parts. Here we can see the heavenly space with the image of the God himself, the image of Jesus Christ, of angels, and the lower part where the people are depicted. Everything is dynamic, all the figures are shown in rapid movements. From this point of view, Michelangelo sometimes is called like the starter of the future Baroque style, like the person who created that background for this future development of art in the Baroque direction. As we have already mentioned before creating a painting, it is always necessary to work out the drawing, because drawing is always the basement for the artist. And here we can see how Michelangelo started, so with what exactly he started in his compositions. Here is an example, Madonna col Bambino. So Madonna with a child, in other words. And it's always very useful to consider such kind of unfinished artworks, because here we can see with what the artist started his creativity. So we can see that he gave that generalizing outlines of the figures, and later on he continued with the detailing it, with fulfilling these outlines. Another genie of the Renaissance period is Raphael Sanzio. He was a painter of Italian High Renaissance, considered one of the greatest and most popular artists of his time. Unlike Leonardo and Michelangelo, Raphael lived a very short life, so he died when he was only 38 years. He was born as Raffaello Santi or Raffaello Sanzio in Urbino on April 6, 1483, and received his early training in art from his father, Giovanni Santi. In 1499 he went to Perugia in Umbria and became a student and assistant of the painter Perugino. Raphael imitated his master closely, and their painting system are so similar that art historians have found it difficult to determine which were painted by Raphael and which were by his master. So here you can see his early self-portrait, 1506. The serene and harmonious qualities of Raphael's paintings were regarded as some of the highest models of the humanist impetus of the time, which sought to explore human's importance in the world through artwork that emphasized supreme beauty. Raphael not only mastered the signature techniques of High Renaissance art, such as sfumato, for example, perspective, and also very detailed anatomical correctness and authentic emotionality and expression. He also incorporated an individual style noted for its clarity, rich color, effortless composition, and a grandeur that was distinctly his own. Although largely known for his paintings, many of which can still be seen in the Vatican Palace, where the frescoed Raphael rooms were the largest work of his career. He was also an architect, printmaker, and expert draftsman. In other words, he was a true man of Renaissance. His social ease and amicable personality allowed him acceptance and career opportunities and some advantages over peers of the time. So Raphael's artworks have some special features. He used balanced pyramidal arrangement like Leonardo. Also, his compositions are very peaceful, bright landscapes on landscaped backgrounds as usual. Here, for example, we can see his artwork Madonna of the Meadow. What about triangle composition? So we have already discussed it when we considered the artworks by Leonardo da Vinci, but actually in the creativity, in later creativity of Raphael, this principle of composition reached its highest point, and even the artists of Victorian period in England in the middle of the 19th century, pre-Raphaelites, they called themselves this way because they just showed that this way that they went away from the main principles that became classical principles of composition that were created by Raphael Sanzio. Raphael, he is an author of plenty of images of wonderful Madonnas with a child. Here, for example, is Madonna Constabile. His artworks are characterized by high tenderness and all the nuances of color, tonality in general. Of course, he used sfumato technique, we can notice it, so all the outlines are very smooth we can see that there are no bright contrasts or almost no bright contrasts, and there are usually some emotions depicted in his creativity. For example, here we can notice some lifelike elements of composition. For example, the child is touching the book, it seems to us he's reading it, and by the way, we can also notice some iconographical elements that are typical for icon painting. So we can see halos around the heads of Jesus Christ and the Virgin Mary. By the way, this halo is even crossed, as it is typical for the image of Jesus Christ. Another artwork, St. George and the Dragon, painted between 1502 and 1503. It depicts the moment, so like the most important part that is described in life of St. George. And symbolically, we should read this image, so we should understand it not just as a straight illustration to some event, but we should understand that that is a symbol of each Christian of fighting with an inner dragon, so with the sins, with all bad that can be focused in our souls. So, and this is like the warrior who is fighting with this evil, protecting his soul. And in our creativity of Renaissance period and in medieval times also, we can notice such kind of presence of some beautiful, wonderful lady that is the symbol of purity, the symbol of soul also. So it means that St. George is protecting the soul from evil. The composition is in general is typical for Raphael in general and for Renaissance also. So we can see that the figures of heroes are placed on background of nature, and the nature is depicted very detailed here. All the attentiveness to the plants, to the trees, to hills, and all this it enriches the composition and makes it look more variable. This composition is called the Wedding of the Virgin, painted in 1504. So it shows the moment described in the Bible when the Virgin Mary, for the law, she was formally married to Joseph. And here we can see this moment depicted by the artist. The composition is classically symmetrical. It also can remind us the principles of the composition on the front tones of ancient Greek temples, for example, or of ancient Roman temples, when we could see this row of figures located horizontal way in horizontal composition. Here we can see that there is a clear division of parts of composition. The lower part is fulfilled with figures, and there is the middle ground and background also. All the lines are tending to one vanishing point in the central part of the composition, and architecture it only increases this feeling of this perspective changes. It also increases the feeling of the three-dimensional space with the help of linear and air perspective. That is typical for Renaissance in general. Here we see the scheme. Here is a horizontal line that is usually on the line of the glance of the viewer, and here in the center is vanishing point. Here is Tondo, the Alba Madonna, painted in 1510. The composition itself very harmonious, and the Tondo composition, the Tondo format was very popular among the Renaissance artists of that period. So we can see that the smooth outlines, this beauty of lines inside of the composition, it corresponds to the general shape of the picture. Here are three main figures as well in this topic. Jesus Christ as the baby depicted here, then the Virgin Mary and John the Baptist, as they were cousins actually, and they had really historical, they had a small difference in age. John the Baptist was about half a year older than Jesus. The figures are shown on the background of nature, typical for Italy, by the way, and all the nature is shown with this emphasizing the air perspective to give this effect of three-dimensional space. Sistine Madonna with Saint Sixtus and Saint Barbara is one of the most famous paintings by Raffaele Sanzio. It was created in 1513 with oil on canvas. The scales you can see here. So the artist depicted this moment, this image, after a very long period of thinking about this composition. He was trying to solve the task, his artistic task, but unfortunately he had to search for a long time for this main concept of his artwork. And one of his friends left such kind of information for us. He wrote down that Raphael once told him that he saw this composition finally when he was sleeping, and finally he got this concept. So he came up to a centric type of composition, also symmetrical. We can see in the center the image of the Virgin Mary holding Jesus Christ, the baby. And on the sides there are figures of Saint Sixtus, the Pope, and also Saint Barbara here. By the way, we can see that there is like the entrance to the composition through this depiction of the Pope's head and also the images of this very famous putos, little angels. So Madonna is coming from the heavenly space, coming to us. She is descending from heavens to give her only child to the humanity as the sacrifice. The composition reminds us somehow some theatrical scenery because of these heavy draperies of curtains that divide this front ground, the middle ground from the background. On the background, by the way, we can see the plenitude of different small faces of angels, because according to the sacred texts, there is plenitude of angels and they are very close to God in heavens. She is descending and stepping on clouds. This motif is actually the motif of praying, the motif of praying that was widespread in Byzantine icon painting, for example. There were the images of different donators, so those people who did a lot for the Christian church, and those people are usually, or the images of saints turning to the central part of the composition that are turning to the Lord and the Virgin Mary and praying them for mercy for people living on earth. Madonna of the Chair with Saint John the Baptist as a child, painted between 1513 and 1514. So all the images, all the depictions of the Virgin Mary, Jesus Christ and other saints, all these images are very refined, created by Raffaele Sanzio, and they really reflect his aristocratic kind of personality. The Virgin Mary is looking at us with such kind of a very specific glance. It is fulfilled with love from one point of view, but from another, she is a very, very young mother, and she knows that she has to give her only child as a sacrifice to this world, and she's holding Jesus, and it's clear to us that she feels sorrow in her soul because of this. And all these features, all this emotional idea of fulfillment of this artwork, of this topic, is shown by the artist. Here is the fragment for you to see sfumato technique, so all the very smooth outlines, all the glances, soft touches of brush strokes. The portrait that is called La Donna Velata or La Farnarina. So this is a portrait of Raphael's beloved one. So she as a model appears sometimes in the artworks of the artist, of the master. We can see here some impact of the creativity of Leonardo. This portrait, from the point of view of its compositional features, of the glance even, it somehow can remind us Mona Lisa. So the model is depicted here in three-quarter position. She has such kind of a tender smile and a glance that is fulfilled with some mystery. So we also can see that the impact on the face is underlined, like it's made by this shape of the draperies around her face. And that increased the effect of triangle type of composition. The artist used here a very typical for Renaissance effect of the three-dimensional space when the arm of the model with this exaggerated volume of fabrics of all these draperies is shown on the front ground, like it's very close to us, and so everything that is a little bit further, that is a little bit less detailed than this front ground. So it creates this three-dimensional space effect. And also we can notice that the background is very smooth, just to draw all the attention of the viewer on the central part of the composition. Raphael Sanzio is also known for his very few artworks on the mythological subject, because predominantly he worked in portrait genre, in religious genre, of course, so these were his leading ideas, but sometimes we can also see the turning for antiquity subjects, like here, for example, in the artwork Triumph of Galatea, painted in 1512. One of the features of this composition, of this artwork, is the usage of very bright colors. We see here that there is an unusual combination of bright blue and bright red. So that makes the general effect from this artwork as something very positive and energetic. The School of Athens, this is a fresco in the Stanza della Signatura that was created between 1509 and 1511. Although called the School of Athens, the title refers to philosophers from the classical world rather than from any particular school of philosophy. What is important is the way in which Raphael has gathered all the most famous of the classical philosophers within a marvelous Renaissance building, the architecture of which points to Bramante's design for the new St. Peter's Basilica. Many of the philosophers are recognizable because of the specificity of their iconography, which would have been widely understood at the time, drawn from busts recovered from archaeological excavations. So we see Plato, said to be portrait of Leonardo, painted in Home Age, and Aristotle in the central part of the composition. They are carrying their well-known works, Timaeus and Aptus, respectively. Also identifiable are Pythagoras in the foreground, Euclid on the right, and Zoroaster holding the heavenly sphere, Ptolemy holding the earthly sphere, and Diogenes on the stairs holding a dish. The gestures of the philosophers depicted in the fresco have been subject to considerable academic interpretation and debate. Leaning over Pythagoras is said to be that of the Arab philosopher Averroes, who is credited with bringing the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle to the West. Let's again turn to the central part of the composition with the images of Plato and Aristotle. So here we can see that Plato is pointing upwards towards heaven and Aristotle is pointing towards the earth. So that means that that's like the symbols of their main philosophical concepts, because Plato was talking about the ideas that spirit is on the first place, and Aristotle is saying that material side of life is the most important. Despite the fact that this is a very huge fresco that has the scale of 5 meters on 7.7 meters, but in general it is also very detailed. Let's now consider some compositional features and the usage of perspective. So the artist here really showed again the masterity of a perspective, both linear and air perspectives. He depicts writers, philosophers of ancient Greece in a typical Renaissance setting. And here we can see that, what about Renaissance, that this is the combination of architectural features of ancient Greek times and especially of ancient Rome, with this plenitude of arcades, of vaulting system, of coffers, for example, of monumental sculptures. All these outlines, they are tending to the central vanishing point, as we have noticed in the previous compositions. So thank you for your attention.